Masechet Baba Batra Daf Nun. On the previous daf, we saw a statement by Amemar that if a husband and wife sell property that she brought into the marriage, that she will take out of the marriage as is, called nichse melog, the sale is invalid. And the question is why? If they both agree, why is the sale invalid? The husband owns the right to the produce while they're married. The woman retains the ownership of the property itself and will get it back after the marriage. And so if they both agree and they both sold it to a third party, that guy, he went and he asked the guy and he made a price with him for the produce, and he made a price with her for the ownership of the land itself, and they both agreed to it. Why would it be invalid? So at first we thought that perhaps it's because the woman can claim, oh, this is under duress, I never really wanted to sell it. But this would be a problem because if we inferred from the Mishnah that there is a case where a husband can bring proof that he bought land from his wife, and it would be valid. And if this case is invalid, then we could not find any case where a husband would be able to bring proof that he bought property from his wife, and this was a problem. So we already saw one solution, one explanation of Amemar. Amemar meant, in the first answer, is that ish ve'isha means a husband or a wife who sold without the other selling. If only one of them sells and the other one doesn't, that's why it is not valid, because both of them have to sell it. If only the husband sells it without her permission, well, she is really the owner, so certainly she can go and get it back after he dies. And similarly, if she sells it, the husband has the right to the produce, and he is considered the prior owner, and such that he can take it back from that buyer. So that's what Amemar meant. If either of them sold it separately, independently, unilaterally, then it's not valid. But if they sell it together, then it is valid, and so that solved our problem. Here is a case where, just like a third party can buy it from both of them, if they both agree, so too the husband can buy it from his wife, and if he has proof, that's considered a valid sale, and it's not considered duress. She cannot claim duress because this is her property totally, and she could easily protest if she didn't want to sell it. So that was one explanation of Amemar. However, it's a bit difficult because you have to say ish ve'isha means the husband or the wife, but simple reading sounds like they both agreed and they both sold it to this third party. And so now we give a different explanation of Amemar's statement. Perhaps Amemar is following the minority view of Rabbi Elazar, who's mentioned in the following baraita. It's a long baraita, so let's just say now what Rabbi Elazar says. Rabbi Elazar says that in order to be considered an owner of something and to be able to have a right to sell it, you have to both control it and own it, right? You have to own the item itself, and you have to be able to control the profits, that you enjoy the profits. If you have only one or the other, then you're not considered the master of that thing, and you don't have a right to sell it, or we'll see how it applies here to ownership of a slave. So as it applies to this, what Amemar meant to say here is that neither the husband nor the wife can sell it, not even together, because each one has a deficiency. The husband doesn't own the property itself, and the wife does not have the right to the produce right now. So even if they join together and try to sell it, they can't do it, right? Each one has something that's preventing them. One can only sell a property if that same individual both owns the item and has the right to the profit. So while they're married, they cannot sell it. It's an invalid sale. So that's how we're going to explain Amemar. According to this answer, Amemar is following this minority view of Rabbi Elazar. And in fact, according to this view, there is no case that would fulfill the inference from the Mishnah in which a husband would be able to buy land from his wife. The wife would not be able to sell it in any case, because even if it belongs to her, she does not have the right to the produce while they're married and would not be able to sell it. And then in other cases when it's his property, then you'd have the problem that she could say it's under duress. So according to the Rabbi Elazar, we would in fact have a problem with the inference of our Mishnah, but we could say that Amemar is following Rabbi Elazar and our Mishnah follows any of the other opinions that are in the following baraita. Okay, so that's how we're going to explain Amemad. Let's see what this Baraita actually says. Detanya. Hamocheret avdo pasak imo sheyeshameshenu sheloshim yom. Some guy owns a slave, an Eved Kena'ani, and he sells it to someone else, but with the condition that the slave remains with the seller for 30 days. I'm going to sell you my slave, but I want to keep him for 30 days. And after 30 days, then it'll go to you. But I'm selling it to you from now. I'm just kind of selling you. You're the owner, but I get to benefit from the profits of the slave for the next 30 days. That's the case. Now, we're talking about the law of a master who hits and kills his Eved Kena'ani. And the halacha is that the master gets the capital punishment, which is quite an innovation in the Torah. In general, in the ancient world, a slave is just a property. If someone can kill their animal, they wouldn't be punished. And the same thing was for a slave. But the Torah says not so. Even for an Eved Kena'ani, one is not allowed to harm him. If you harm him, he goes free. And if master kills a slave, gets capital punishment. In fact, anyone who kills a slave will get capital punishment. There is, however, a special leniency when it comes to a master. And that is, if the master hits his slave and he doesn't die right away, he survives more 24 hours or more. In that case, we say, well, it's not clear that there's a direct connection between the master striking him and his dying. He didn't die right away. He died from his injuries, from a sickness later on. And so if the slave survives more than 24 hours, then the master is not liable to capital punishment. That's a special leniency for a master. That does not apply to other people. If someone who's not the master goes and strikes this Eved Kena'ani and he dies after 2 days, and it's obvious that it was because of that strike, then that person who struck him does get capital punishment. So normally someone would get capital punishment. And we're talking about a case not where he got better and then got sick again. Right? He never got better, so he died because of that strike. Someone else would get capital punishment. But the master, he has a special exemption that if the slave dies within 24 hours, even the master gets capital punishment. Afterwards, not. Okay, that's the halakha we're talking about. Now we want to try to apply it to this case where you have a seller and a buyer. The buyer for these 30 days and afterwards is the owner. The owner owns the body of the slave. However, the seller retained the right to use the slave, the profits of the slave, for those 30 days. So if one or the other hit the slave and he died after 24 hours, who would get the exemption of capital punishment? Who's considered the master for those 30 days? Is it the seller who has the right to the profits, or the buyer who owns the body? So that's subject to machloket. Rabbi Meir Omer, Harishon yeshno bedin yom o yomayim, mipnei shehu tachtav, v'asheni eno bedin yom o yomayim, mipnei she'eno tachtav, kasabar kinyan perot ki kinyan haguf tameh. First opinion is Rabbi Meir. He says the first one, meaning the seller who's using the slave for 30 days, he has the right of the law of if he survives for a day or two, because the slave is under his hand. He's using the slave. The profits of the slave go to him. So he's considered the master for those 30 days, and he would be exempt if he hits the slave and he dies in 2 days. But the second one, the buyer, this is not exempt under the law of a day or two, because even though he owns the right to the slave, it's not under his hand. He is not using the slave. And therefore, if the second guy would hit the slave and he dies after 2 days, that he would get capital punishment. So we see that Rabbi Meir thinks that owning the profit of something is like owning the item itself, right? The main owner, that we call the master for the purpose of this law, is whoever is using the produce. They're considered the master. Okay, that's opinion one. Opinion two. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hasheni yeshno bedin yom o yomayim mipnei shehu kaspo. Harishon eno bedin yom o yomayim she'eno kaspo. Kasabar kinyan perot lav ki kinyan haguf tameh. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's the second one, the buyer. It would be exempt under the law of if he doesn't die in a day or two, because he is the owner. He bought the slave, so he owns the body of the slave. Even during the first 30 days, if the second guy would hit the slave and he dies after 24 hours, he would be exempt. If the first guy, the seller, hits the slave even during the first 30 days, so he is not exempt under the law of Yom or Yomaim because he does not own the slave. He is using the profits of it, but he doesn't own it. And so therefore we see, according to the Yehuda, ownership of produce of an item is not considered owning the item itself. It's whoever owns the actual item, he's considered the master. And that's therefore the second one, and not the first one. Okay, so that's the opposite of Rabbi Meir's opinion. And now a third opinion, Rabbi Yosef Omer, Shenehem yeshnan bedin yom o yomayim, ze mipnei shu tachtav, veze mipnei shu kaspo, umisapek aleh, I kinyan perot kinyan gaguf tameh, I lav ki kinyan naguf tameh, usfek nefashot lehakel. Rabbi Yosef says both the seller and the buyer will be exempt under the law of a day or two if either of them hits the slave and he doesn't die right away, he dies after 24 hours, they both are exempt. Why? One, because he is under his hand. That's the seller has the right to use the slave right now. So he's considered the master in that sense. And the buyer is also considered the master because he bought the slave and he owns the body of the slave. And Rabbi Yosef has a doubt whether who is considered the owner, the master, whether it's the person who is enjoying the produce or the one who owns the body. And so since he's not sure, so therefore we say, listen, safek nefashot, like when it comes to capital punishment, could be that you are considered the master, could be you're considered the master. So neither of them will get capital punishment because whenever we have a doubt regarding capital punishment, so we do not kill the defendant. And so that's Rabbi Yosef. But the law will apply to both of them. Rabbi Elazar Omer. Here's what we were waiting for. Shenehem enan bedin yom o yomayim. Ze lefi she'eno tachtav, veze lefi she'eno kaspo. Rabbi Elazar says the opposite of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said both of them are exempt. Rabbi Elazar says neither of them are exempt. Why are neither exempt? Well, one, because it's not under his hand. That's the buyer. The buyer does not have the right to use the slave for those 30 days, and therefore he's not considered the master. And the seller is also not considered the master because he does not own the slave. And therefore, if either of them hit the slave at any time during those 30 days or after, if either of them hit the slave and he dies after 24 hours, then whoever hit him will get capital punishment. Neither of them can claim the exemption of being the master. Okay, that's very interesting. Now, what's the reason of Rabbi Elazar? Amar Rava, my ta'amad Rabbi Elazar, Amar Kera, lo yukam ki kaspo hu, kaspo hamiyuchad lo. His source is, it said, the pasuk says regarding someone who hits a slave, that if he dies after 24 hours, pasuk says a day or two. So we're taking that to mean 24 hours, which would cover over a day, or it could be over 2 days. If it happens in the middle of the day, then he shall not be punished. The master does not get capital punishment because he owns the slave. So while someone else would get capital punishment because you killed the person, doesn't matter if they didn't die right away, they didn't get better. But the master, he has a certain right over his slave. He can't kill him, and if he dies right away, then that's capital punishment. But if he survives, then that's an exemption because he owns him. Kaspo, but Kaspo says he owns him only if the ownership is unique to that master, meaning if the master owns both the body of the slave and the profits of the slave during that time. If he's the full master over everything, then he gets this exemption from capital punishment. But in this case, where they share the slave, one owns the body, one owns the profits, so neither of them are the full owner, and therefore neither are exempt. What we see from this halacha of Rabbi Elazar is very interesting. We're comparing two very different areas of halacha, but we're applying the same principle. Just like over here, Rabbi Elazar says, you have to own both the item and the use of it in order to be considered the master. So too regarding land. If you want to sell land, you have to be the full owner of the land and have the right to enjoy the profits. Then you can sell it. But if you're sharing it, like a husband and wife, where the husband has the right to use the produce while they're married, and the wife, she owns the body property of the land itself. Since they share it, so neither is considered the master, and so neither of them can sell the land. And even if they both come together, still, it doesn't work. You have to have one master over the whole thing in order to sell it. Otherwise, it cannot be done. So now we explain that. This is the second explanation for Amemar. He follows the law of Rabbi Elazar. And indeed, according to Amemar, there really would not be a case where a husband would be permitted to buy land from his wife. It just wouldn't work. And so according to Amemar, we in fact would have a problem with the inference from our Mishnah. So that's a problem. But he follows Rabbi Elazar, so he has a Tana he can rely on. And the Mishnah can be one of the other opinions in this Baraita, in which case the husband would be able to buy land that belonged to her if it was nichse melog, and she agreed to sell it to him. And that's the case where she would not have a right to say it was under duress, because she could have protested, and if she didn't protest and agreed to sell it to him, and he has proof, then that sale is valid. So now we go back to the Mishnah that says that a husband cannot make a chazakah on property that his wife owns and brings into the marriage. The husband cannot say, oh look, I've been using it for 3 years, and therefore you sold it to me and it's mine. No, he has a right to use the produce while they're married, so he cannot make a chazakah. We ask, V'hamar Rav eshet ish siricha limchot. Hold on, this seems to contradict a statement of Rav, and Rav generally cannot contradict a Mishnah, because Rav says that a married woman has to make a protest in order that land that she owns and brings into the marriage will not be taken over by someone else. If someone's using it, and it's approaching 3 years, she has to make a protest. Otherwise, that whoever is using that land can make a chazakah. Now, let's clarify. What does Rav mean? Beman ilema be'acher v'hamarav en machazikin b'nichse eshet ish elalav ba'al. So, who does she have to protest against? Who might be squatting on her land? If it's a third party, not the husband, but someone else comes and is sitting on the land. Well, Rav said that one cannot make a chazakah on the property of a married woman. That's because the wife can assume that the husband is taking care of things. So, if someone's squatting on the land that she brought into the marriage and she doesn't protest, and we say, oh, well, why didn't you protest if it's yours? She'll say, because I'm just the wife around here. My husband takes care of the properties. He's the one that enjoys the produce and all that. So I was assuming that he would take care of it and protest. That's why I didn't protest. My lack of protest is not an indication that I'm not the owner. I am the owner. And so Rav says that a woman does not have to make a protest if there's a third party on the field, because that third party cannot make a chazakah in any case, so she doesn't even have to protest. So it can't be talking about that case, since Rav himself said that a third party cannot make a chazakah. He could not have said that she has to make a protest. Rather, the first statement of Rav must be talking about the husband. The husband is there for 3 years, and he's enjoying her produce of the land that she brought into the marriage. Rav says that she better make a protest before the end of 3 years. Otherwise, the husband can say, oh, I bought this from you, and see, you didn't protest. This is a contradiction to our Mishnah, because the Mishnah says that a husband cannot make a chazakah, no matter how long he's there on the wife's produce, and therefore she would not have to make a protest. So this is a challenge to Rav. Amar Rava leolam baba'al uchegon shechafar ba barot shichin ume'arot. Rava says, indeed, I'm going to agree with this interpretation that we just said, that he's talking about a case where Rav was talking about a case where it's the husband that is squatting on the land. And that what you asked, wait, but he doesn't get a chazakah by enjoying the produce. That's true. Rav agrees with the Mishnah that he cannot make a chazakah by enjoying the produce. Here, Rav is taught, when the Rav says that she has to make a protest, that's talking about a case where the husband is digging pits, ditches, and caves on the land, ruining the land. It damages the land. In that case, she has to make a protest. If she doesn't protest, then he can claim that he's the owner. Let's explain why. When the husband is enjoying the produce for 3 years, she's happy with that. That's actually part of the deal of the marriage. I bring in the land, and you can enjoy the produce, and he provides everything for her sustenance. And so then he's using it with permission. We saw above, even if he relinquishes the rights to the land and then goes and takes the produce, the wife doesn't mind. They're married. She's generous. That's fine. Go and take the produce. So wife is not going to protest when the husband is using it in a productive way. However, if the husband is destroying the land, causing it damage, then the wife, if she is the owner, should make a protest. And if she allows the husband to go on for 3 years damaging the land and doesn't protest, then that means that it doesn't belong to her. So, in fact, a husband can make a chazakah. He cannot make a chazakah by enjoying the produce productively, but he can make a chazakah if he damages the land for 3 years and she doesn't protest. That's the case that I was talking about, where she has to make a protest. So there's no contradiction. The Mishnah was talking about the husband using it productively, and Rav was talking about a case where the husband is damaging the land. Now we challenge that. V'hamar Rav Nachman amar Abba bar Abu en chazaka lin zakin. Hold on. Rav Nachman said that there is no chazakah for damages. In other words, someone who's damaging a field does not gain a chazakah. You only gain a chazakah by using it in a normal way that an owner would use it. An owner would not go and damage his own field. Therefore, in general, one can only make a chazakah if you're taking from it productively, living in a house productively, in a normal way. And therefore, this guy, the husband, is using it in a damaging way. He never gets a chazakah. So this, we challenged Rava's answer, since a husband who's damaging it should not get a chazakah. No one who damages property should get a chazakah ever. Ema en din chazakah din zakin. So we say, no, Rav Nachman wasn't talking, what didn't mean that you never get a chazakah. Is actually the opposite. There's no law of 3 years of chazakah when you're doing damage. Instead, the chazakah happens immediately. In other words, if someone goes and is living in your house for 3 years and you don't say anything, then they can claim it's theirs. But if someone comes and damages your house or damages your field, even for 1 day, you should protest. A proper owner of a house would not let someone else cause damage to their field. And therefore, if someone is damaging your field and you don't say anything, they can claim ownership immediately. So that's actually what Rav Nachman meant here. And therefore, this resurrects Rava's answer. When Rav said that a woman has to protest against her husband damaging the land, that means that she has to protest right away, right? She's fine with the husband taking the produce. That's fine all day long. So there's no chazakah when the husband takes the produce. But if the husband damages the land, then she has to protest immediately. If she doesn't protest immediately, then the husband can claim, oh, it's mine, you sold it to me. That's one answer. Or another way to explain Rav Nachman, I ba'et ema, lavi tamar ala, Rav Mari amar bekutra, Rav Zavid amar bebet hakiseh. It could be Rav Nachman was not talking about chazakah of usage of the land at all. He meant something completely different. That you don't get a chazakah, a presumption for permission to cause damage to someone else. For example, Rav Marisa gave an example as talking about smoke. Rav Zavid says talking about an outhouse. In other words, if we are neighbors and I have an oven that makes a lot of smoke, it goes into your land and bothers you. Let's say you don't say anything for 3 years. You don't care. And then after 3 years you say, listen, the smoke is really bothering me. Can I say, well, I've been bothering you for 3 years and you didn't say anything, therefore I have a right to continue to annoy you? No, I don't have that. Or similarly, if I have an outhouse, it's near your property, making a bad smell. So, yeah, you don't say anything for 3 years. You tolerate it. After 3 years, you say, outhouse has to go out. I don't tolerate it anymore. I can't say, well, there's a presumption. No, there's no chazakah when it comes to causing damage to someone else, right? Even if you didn't mind, I've been hitting you for 3 years straight and you didn't say anything. So I have a right to keep hitting you because you let me do that until now. No, there's no such thing. There's no chazakah. That's what Rav Nachman was talking about. He wasn't talking about squatting rights and ownership rights or anything like that, and therefore that's another way of explaining away Rav Nachman that has nothing to do with this case, and so that brings back Rava's answer is totally fine. We're talking about a husband who is causing damage, and if he's causing damage and she doesn't say anything, then he will have a right to say it's mine. So she has to make a protest when there is damage. So those were two answers. Rav Yosef amar le'olam be'acher uchegon shachala miksat chazaka b'chai habal v'shalosh shanim achar mitat habal migo de'i ba'e amar le ana zebinta minach כי אמר לה נמה עד זבנתה לה וזבנה ניהלי מהמן. Rav Yosef says that Rav's first statement that a woman has to make a protest against a squatter, in fact, is talking about a third-party squatter, not her husband squatting. The husband never has a chazakah on the property of his wife. As the Mishnah said, the Mishnah is totally fine. And Rav said that if someone else tries to squat on her land, then she can't. Now, we said that doesn't make sense because Rav also said that one cannot make a chazakah for a married woman. In other words, since she's married, she says, my husband's supposed to take care of it and make the protest. So what about that? Rav Yosef explains. We're talking about a case where the third party was squatting on her land that she brought into the marriage while they were married for some amount of time, a short amount of time, and then the husband died, and he continued squatting on that same land that's now totally hers for 3 full years. So he has amigo, the squatter. He could, if he wanted, he could say, I bought it from you. He could tell the wife, I've been here for 3 years. You never told me anything. And so I bought it from you. And he would have to be believed. So therefore, we also will believe him when he says that you sold the field to your husband and he sold it to me. We also will believe him. That's the case that Rav was talking about when we said that she should make a protest. When should she make a protest? Not for the husband. If the husband is using it, the husband's allowed to use it. That's what the Mishnah said. There's no chazakah for a husband. But if the husband is using it, then he died, and then someone else is using it, and it's getting to 3 years with that third party squatting on it, then she better make a protest. That was the case that Rav said his first law, and there's no contradiction to the Mishnah. Lastly, Gufa Amar Rav en machazikin b'nichse eshet ish. We want to analyze a little bit further Rav's statement that one cannot claim a chazakah on the property of a married woman. So even though it's her property she brought into the marriage, the expectation is that the husband would protest. So we can't come to her and say, why didn't you protest? She says, I was relying on my husband. And therefore, the squatter cannot say, well, she didn't protest. No, she wasn't thinking that she would protest, even though she is the rightful owner. Okay, that was Rav's halacha. However, v'dayanei gola amru machazikin. The judges in exile, they disagreed, and they said that someone can make a chazakah if they're squatting on a married woman's land for 3 years, and she doesn't say anything, then they do have a chazakah. They disagreed with Rav. Amar Rav, halacha kedayanei golha. And then Rav says, halacha is like them, that you can make a chazakah. So he seems to contradict himself, or maybe he changed his mind. Amru le Rav Kanav Rav Aseh le Rav, hadar be'emor mishema'ateh. So the students of Rav Kanav Rav Aseh, they ask, Master, did you change your mind from what you said at first? First you said there's no chazakah, and then you said halacha is like the dayanei golah. So there is a chazakah. Did you change your mind? And Rav says, no, I didn't change my mind. Amar lehu mistabera amari kederav Yosef. Rather, what I meant to say is that there is a case, some cases where the halacha will be like dayanei golah. In general, you cannot make a chazakah on a married woman's property. However, in a case like that Rav Yosef talked about, where someone started squatting on a woman's land while the husband was alive, while they were married, and then the husband died, and then he continued squatting on that land, That's a case where someone can make a chazakah on the land of a married woman. It's called the land of a married woman because she was, at the beginning of the story, she was a married woman, and that's when the squatting started. Now, by the end of it, she's no longer Eshet Ish because the husband died. But that's the case where the Dayane Gola, I would agree with their ruling that you can make a chazakah. But in a general case where the husband is alive and well, and they're still happily married, in that case, a squatter would not be able to make a chazakah. So Rav didn't change his mind. He just said that what the other judges said makes sense in a particular case like that of Rav Yosef. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.